They thought I wouldn't find out. My own son and daughter sat at the kitchen table, whispering about the inheritance strategy, not realizing the baby monitor I'd forgotten to unplug from the dining room still carried their words straight into my den. They were planning to have me declared mentally unfit so they could claim everything early, my house, my savings, even the antique shop that had been in my family for 3 generations. But what I did next made them regret every whispered word. Before we dive deeper, don't forget to subscribe and drop a comment letting us know where you're tuning in from. I'm Leonard Hayes, 74 years old. A retired watchmaker, though sometimes I still find myself picking up broken clocks at flea markets just for the joy of hearing gears click back into place under my hands. It is hard to turn off the habit of a lifetime. I've been a widower for 9 years now, 9 years since I held Diane's hand as her breath rattled in her chest for the last time. Some nights, when the house is too quiet, I still reach for her side of the bed, only to find nothing but cool sheets and silence. I live in the same brick house on Willow Street in Hartford that we bought in 1973. Diane wanted it the moment she saw the ivy climbing up the porch railings. I wanted it because the basement had good light for a workshop. Between the two of us, we made it into a home. Every creak in the wooden floorboards is a language I know by heart, one that speaks of Christmas mornings when little feet pounded down the hall, of birthday parties that left cake crumbs ground into the rug, of late-night arguments followed by laughter in the kitchen at 2 a.m. My children, Lucas and Rachel, once loved this place like it was a living, breathing member of the family. Lucas used to lie on the living room floor building Lego towers taller than himself while I repaired watches at the table. Rachel would sit on the porch with Diane, braiding her doll's hair while her mother braided hers. We had rituals, pancakes every Sunday morning, decorated with too many chocolate chips, summers spent camping in the backyard under a makeshift tent of bed sheets and clothesline, Diane reading ghost stories with a flashlight, the kids squealing and hiding their faces in my shoulders. Diane believed in me when nobody else did. We met in 1969, at a street fair where I had set up a booth selling repaired pocket watches and cheap wristwatches from pawnshops. She wasn't impressed by the watches, but by the way I spoke about them, like they had souls. She laughed at me right there, her blue scarf fluttering in the summer wind, and asked if I believed time could ever be fixed. I married her a year later, because she already knew the answer. Lucas came first, in 1975. A serious child, always taking things apart, radios, clocks, toys, just to see how they worked. He'd sit beside me in the workshop, asking questions until Diane had to drag him upstairs for bed. I thought, for a while, he'd follow in my footsteps. But the moment sports and girls caught his attention, the magic of gears and springs faded for him. Rachel was born 4 years later. She was the opposite of her brother, bubbly, dramatic, always looking for a stage, even if it was just the front porch. She'd sit on the counter while Diane cooked, singing made-up songs about noodles and apples, while I wound watches at the kitchen table. She'd wrap her tiny arms around my neck at bedtime and say, "Don't ever let me go, Daddy." Those were the years when the house felt alive. When Sunday pancakes meant sticky fingers tugging at my sleeve, when Christmas lights meant Lucas tangled in cords while Rachel insisted every ornament belonged on the same branch. Diane used to stand back and smile like all the chaos was exactly the life she had dreamed of. This house holds all of that. It still smells faintly of Diane's lilac perfume in the upstairs hall when the summer heat wakes old scents from the wallpaper. Her handwriting is still tucked away in recipe cards, little notes that say, "Extra butter for Lucas," or "Rachel likes it with honey." She has been gone for nearly a decade, but in these walls, she never fully left. But children grow. The pancakes stopped when sleepovers with friends became more important. The backyard tents collapsed when they both decided summers were better spent anywhere but with us. By the time Diane got sick, I was the only one still clinging to those old traditions. Lucas and Rachel were adults then, already building lives where family time was something they squeezed in between other obligations. That's why what happened next cut deeper than any loss I'd already endured. Because the children who once treated this place like a sacred sanctuary, now look at it only as an asset. To them, it is not memory, it's market value. Not love, it's leverage. Those memories died quicker than Diane did. Now, when they come to this house, they don't see their mother's lilacs in the hall, or the ink stains on the desk from Rachel's high school essays, or the faint outline on the doorframe where we measured Lucas's height year after year. They see square footage. They see dollar signs. It's as if all the moments I kept sacred, they've already buried. The last time both of them visited at once was 3 Sundays ago. I remember because I'd set out the good china, Diane's china. Blue floral edges, tiny chips here and there, but still beautiful. She used to say they made even a simple stew taste like a feast. Lucas walked in first, tapping on his phone even before he kissed my cheek. He barely looked up as he muttered, "Hey, Dad," then drifted straight into the dining room. Rachel followed, balancing a paper cup from some cafe, the smell of burnt espresso clinging to her coat. "God, Dad, you still have that rug," she said, towing at the Persian carpet in the hallway. "It's like, 40 years old. Imagine what a hardwood refinish could do for the resale value." Resale value. That was her greeting. I smiled the way fathers do when they don't want to start a fight. "Your mother picked that rug out," said. The colors reminded her of her grandmother's parlor. Rachel shrugged, setting her coffee cup right on the polished console table without a coaster. Diane would have scolded her for that. Over dinner, Lucas hardly touched his plate. His eyes kept drifting around the room, as though taking mental notes. The crown molding I installed with my own 2 hands. The walnut cabinets Diane and I had saved 3 years to afford. The framed photographs on the wall, though he didn't look at the faces, just at the frames themselves. At one point, he asked, "So, Dad, have you ever thought about downsizing? I mean, this house is, 2,000 square feet. More. Big maintenance for someone your age." I swallowed my stew slowly, buying time. "I manage just fine. The garden keeps me busy." He nodded, but his tone sharpened. "Busy isn't the same as realistic. Rachel and I just think, well, maybe it's time you looked at other options." Rachel jumped in eagerly. "There are some amazing condos downtown. Elevator access, no yard work. You'd be around people your own age. Safe, convenient. Honestly, it would make all our lives easier." There it was again. Not about me. About them. I stirred my spoon against the china bowl, the sound sharp in the silence. "And what would happen to this place?" They exchanged a glance, quick, practiced, like they'd already rehearsed this conversation. "Well," Lucas said carefully, "if you sold, you'd have a lot of capital freed up. Could help with Sophie's tuition. With our mortgages. Everybody benefits. Family benefits. Everybody benefits." I felt the words settle like dust in my lungs. When they left that night, Rachel hugged me briskly, already checking her phone again. Lucas clapped my shoulder, murmured something about a market peak and timing is everything. Their footsteps echoed down the walkway, and I stood in the doorway long after their car taillights vanished. The house felt colder once they were gone. Diane's china sat on the table, stained with coffee rings and half-eaten stew. I gathered each plate carefully, washing them by hand the way she used to. But no amount of scrubbing could remove the aftertaste of their visit. That was the night I began to understand, my children weren't seeing me anymore. They were seeing the will. It happened on an ordinary Wednesday evening, the kind of night when nothing seems worth remembering, until it becomes unforgettable. I was in the den, sitting in Diane's old armchair, polishing the face of a pocket watch I'd picked up at a flea market. A cheap thing, mass-produced in the 1950s, but I liked the challenge of coaxing life back into dead gears. The tick-tick of my tools, the lamp glow on brass, the quiet hum of the furnace, these were my companions now. That's when I heard the faint crackle. At first, I thought it was interference from the old radio on the shelf. But when I looked up, I saw it, the baby monitor, perched on the corner of the desk, its little green light flickering. It had been there for weeks, though I hardly noticed anymore. Sophie, my granddaughter, my Rachel's girl, used to bring it when she was younger, so her parents could keep an ear on her while she napped upstairs during visits. After she outgrew it, the thing ended up shoved in a drawer. But a month ago, when I couldn't hear the doorbell from the den, I plugged it back in, setting the transmitter in the dining room like a makeshift intercom. That night, it betrayed me by doing exactly what it was built to do, carry voices from one room into another. I almost turned it off when I first heard them, Lucas's voice, low and sharp, mixing with the clatter of silverware. I assumed they were just waiting for me in the dining room, maybe talking about plans for dinner. But then Rachel spoke, and something in her tone made me freeze mid-polish. "He's getting worse, Lucas. Last week he couldn't remember Sophie's grade. That's early dementia, I swear. We can use that." The screwdriver slipped from my hand and clinked against the watch casing. My pulse thudded in my ears. Lucas answered, calm, businesslike. "I've already spoken with Brian. If we get a doctor to write a formal report, we can file for guardianship. It'll look like we're protecting him." Rachel gave a short, bitter laugh. "Protecting him? We're protecting the inheritance. This house alone is worth $500,000. Add the shop, the accounts, if we wait, probate will eat a chunk of it. Better to take control now, while we can still make the decisions." I sat there, motionless, staring at that little glowing green light as if it were a snake in my home. Every word crackled through the speaker, each one sharper than the last. Lucas leaned closer to the transmitter, his voice dropping. "We just need him declared incompetent. Once that happens, we split everything. He can't stop us. Honestly, Rachel, he'll probably thank us for taking the weight off his shoulders." I pressed my palms flat against the arms of the chair, grounding myself against the urge to storm in right then. My children, the ones who once squealed in backyard tents, were whispering about dismantling my life as if it were a real estate deal. They didn't know the monitor was carrying every word straight into my den. And that night, I made myself a promise: if they wanted to treat me like I was already dead, I'd show them just how alive I still was. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw their faces at my table, Rachel sipping coffee without a coaster, Lucas scanning the walls like a surveyor, not my children, but predators circling what they thought was already theirs. Their voices replayed in my head, crackling through that monitor: incompetent, guardianship, probate. Words dressed up in legal clothes, but underneath, they were sharp knives aimed at my back. I sat at Diane's desk until dawn, the pocket watch still lying open beside me, its hands frozen at 7:42. Fitting, I thought. Even time itself had stopped when I realized what my children were planning. Anger alone wouldn't save me. No, this would require precision. A watchmaker's patience. I needed to know how far they'd already gone, and how much they thought they could hide from me. So I left the baby monitor exactly where it was, but added something else, an old digital recorder I used to keep in the shop for logging customer notes. I set it up on the den shelf, synced to the monitor's frequency, and let it run. If they spoke in my dining room again, I'd have their every word. But eavesdropping would only get me part of the truth. The rest, I'd need to draw out myself. Subtly. Casually. Like winding a spring too tight and waiting for it to snap. The following Sunday, I invited them both for dinner. I cooked Diane's pot roast recipe, the one that always made the house smell like home, though I noticed neither of them complimented the aroma when they arrived. I poured Lucas a glass of red wine and asked, "How's work been treating you, son? Still managing that development firm?" His eyes flickered. "Busy. Markets shifting. We've got to think about long-term strategies." I nodded slowly, slicing the roast. "Funny thing about long-term. Your mother and I always thought this house would last long enough for the grandchildren. Maybe even their children. Rachel smirked, spearing a carrot with her fork. Oh, Dad, nobody stays in one place forever. Times change. People move on. What matters is making sure assets are used properly, not rotting away in some old building. I chewed my bite slowly, forcing my face into something resembling calm. Assets, I repeated, as though it were a word I'd never heard before. Lucas jumped in quickly, almost too quickly. She just means, it's important to think about the future. Have a plan, you know. For when, well, for when you're not able to handle everything yourself. There it was. Not subtle, not kind. Just the edge of their scheme poking out, daring me to notice. I let my fork rest on the plate and gave them both a tired smile. You're right. Planning is important. They seemed relieved by my agreement. They didn't see the truth, that I was already planning. Only, my plan wasn't to step aside. It was to listen. To wait. To catch every whisper until I knew exactly how they intended to cut me out. Because a man who spends his life repairing clocks knows one thing better than anyone else: timing is everything. 2 weeks later, I got the confirmation I'd been waiting for. They came again on a Saturday afternoon, both claiming they wanted to check in. What they really wanted was to inventory me like a failing business. I offered them tea, set the pot on the dining room table, and excused myself to fetch the sugar bowl from the kitchen. The monitor was already transmitting. The recorder in the den already running. As soon as my footsteps faded, Rachel's voice sharpened. We have to push this, Lucas. He's stubborn, but the longer we wait, the bigger the risk. What if he changes the will? What if he leaves something to Sophie? Lucas scoffed. He won't. Dad's sentimental, but he's predictable. Everything's in our names, it always has been. All we need is the doctor's note. Once the court sees he's losing it, guardianship is automatic. He won't even understand what's happening until it's over. My hands trembled as I gripped the sugar bowl. Their voices spilled through the walls like poison. Rachel leaned in, her tone cutting. Good. Because honestly, I don't want Sophie tangled in this. She's still a kid, she doesn't need to know Grandpa's broke and confused. The shop is falling apart, this house is outdated. We'll liquidate, split the money, move on. She'll thank us when her college bills are covered. Lucas laughed, low and bitter. If she's smart enough to even get into college. The sugar spoon slipped, scattering granules across the counter. I stood there, every muscle tight, forcing myself not to storm back in. They were carving up not just my possessions, but my granddaughter's place in this family. The same child who still colored me pictures for the fridge. I returned to the table, carrying the bowl, my face a mask of practiced calm. Here we are, I said, setting it down gently. Neither of them met my eyes. That night, after they left, Sophie stopped by with a crayon drawing, her and me sitting under the lilac tree out front, a giant sun above us, our names written in uneven purple letters, Grandpa plus Sophie. She pressed it into my hands with a grin. Mom says you're tired a lot, but I know you're strong. Stronger than Dad says. I knelt down, my knees aching, and kissed the top of her head. Don't you worry about me, sweetheart. Grandpa's not going anywhere. And as I pinned her drawing to the refrigerator, I made a silent vow, if there was anyone in this bloodline who deserved to inherit more than walls and bitterness, it was Sophie. She was the last ember of family worth keeping alive. The others? They had just burned their bridge for good. I waited 3 days before I could bring myself to listen to the recordings. They sat on that little digital device in my den, the red light blinking like a heartbeat, daring me to press play. When I finally did, it was worse than I remembered. Rachel's laugh, sharp, cold, so unlike the little girl who once sang songs about noodles and apples on the kitchen counter. Lucas's calm voice, as if he were negotiating a property deal, not dismantling his father's life. The words spilled into the room, echoing off Diane's bookshelves, poisoning the air. Incompetent. Liquidate. Split the money. He won't understand. I turned it off halfway through. My chest was tight, my hands shaking. I wasn't sure if it was rage or grief, maybe both. That's when I called Holbrook, my lawyer. Not because I trusted the law more than myself, but because I needed someone outside the family to hear what I had heard. Someone to tell me I wasn't going mad. He came by that evening, a tall man in a worn suit, smelling faintly of pipe tobacco. I poured him coffee, just as Diane used to, and slid the recorder across the table. He listened without interruption, his face unreadable. When it ended, he exhaled slowly, rubbing his chin. "Leonard," he said, "I've been practicing law for 40 years. I've seen greed tear families apart, but, this?" He shook his head. "This is calculated. They don't just want the inheritance. They want you erased." The words hit harder than the recording. Erased. That was exactly it. "Tell me what to do," I whispered. Holbrook leaned forward, his voice steady. "You do nothing. Not a word. Let them think you're as blind as they believe. Meanwhile, we'll draft something airtight. A living trust. The house, the shop, your savings. Everything transferred out of their reach. When the time comes, they'll walk into court certain they've won, only to discover the ground's been cut out from under them." I nodded, but my mind wasn't on the paperwork. It was on Diane. On her last day, the way she whispered, "Take care of them." I had tried. God knows I had tried. But what do you do when the children you raised sharpen their teeth on your kindness? That night, after Holbrook left, I sat alone in the study. Diane's photograph stood on the desk, her smile frozen in time, her eyes still warm in a way my children's no longer were. "I'm sorry," I whispered to her. "I couldn't make them better people. But I can make sure Sophie has a chance." I opened a fresh folder, smoothed the pages with my hands, and began signing. Each signature felt like a nail sealing a coffin, not for me, but for the image of family I had carried all these years. When I finished, I laid Sophie's crayon drawing on top of the folder. Grandpa plus Sophie, under the giant sun. That would be my compass now. They thought they had me trapped. But they had forgotten who I was, a watchmaker. A man who understood that the smallest gears, turned at the right moment, could bring an entire machine crashing down, or set it to run forever. The papers were signed. The trust was sealed. Legally, everything that mattered was already beyond their reach. All that was left was to wait. But before I let the storm break, something in me needed to be sure. Some stubborn part of me, the father in me, still wanted to give them one last chance. To look them in the eye and see if even a flicker of their old selves remained. So I invited them for dinner. Not a trap this time. Not a recording. Just me, my children, and Diane's old table. I made her roast chicken, the one with lemon and rosemary from the garden, and mashed potatoes the way Rachel used to beg for when she was 8. I even polished the silver. It was the closest thing to family I'd managed in years. They arrived late, of course. Lucas first, loosening his tie, scanning the living room as if checking the resale potential of every chair. Rachel followed, already complaining about traffic, setting her phone on the table like it was more important than anything I had to say. We ate in silence at first, the clink of cutlery filling the void. I watched them carefully, memorizing their faces the way I used to when they were children falling asleep after story time. Halfway through the meal, I set down my fork. My voice was calm, quieter than it had been in months. "Tell me something," I said. "When you were kids, what did this house mean to you?" Rachel frowned, confused. Lucas smirked. "Dad, it's just a house," he said. "Four walls, a roof, some land. Sentimental, sure, but, come on. Times change. Rachel added, honestly, Dad, I don't even know why you cling to it. You could be comfortable in a condo, closer to doctors, closer to us. It's not healthy, living alone surrounded by ghosts. Ghosts? I repeated softly. Is that what you think Diane is? A ghost in these walls? Neither of them answered. I leaned back in my chair, studying them the way I once studied broken watches, trying to find the missing gear, the piece that would make everything work again. But there was nothing. Just silence, their eyes already darting toward the door, toward their lives beyond me. So I gave them the only gift I had left. This is your chance, I said quietly. Not for money. Not for houses. For me. If there's anything left in you that remembers what family means, now is the time to show it. Because once I make my decision, there's no going back. Rachel laughed nervously, glancing at Lucas. Decision? Dad, what are you talking about? Lucas shook his head, his smile thin. Dad, you're overthinking. Nobody's against you. We're just trying to do what's best. You'll see that, eventually. There it was. The lie wrapped in pity. The same tone they'd use with a child who didn't understand. I nodded slowly, swallowing the last of my wine. All right, I said. I just needed to know. I cleared the plates myself after they left, washed the dishes alone, and dried Diane's silver one last time. Their chance was gone. The storm could come now. It happened faster than even I expected. A week after that dinner, I heard the crunch of tires in the driveway. Lucas's black SUV, Rachel's hybrid right behind it. They didn't knock. They came in like they owned the place, voices low but urgent. I stayed in the den, pretending to read, while the baby monitor once again carried their word straight to me. Rachel, the realtor's ready. All we need is Dad's signature on the listing. Just tell him it's a form for insurance or something. Lucas, I've got the power of attorney draft. Once the doctor signs, we don't even need his consent. Probate will never touch it. My blood ran cold, but my hands stayed steady. The timepiece on my desk ticked softly, each second carrying me closer to the moment I'd been waiting for. I stepped into the dining room. They froze mid-sentence, papers spread across the table, Diane's table, like vultures picking a carcass clean. What's all this? I asked calmly. Lucas forced a smile. Dad, nothing to worry about. Just some paperwork. Insurance updates, you know how it is. Rachel chimed in too quickly. Yeah, routine stuff. We'll walk you through it. I walked closer, laid my hand on the stack of documents, and looked at each of them in turn. You really think I can't read my own children anymore? Their smiles faltered. The silence stretched. That's when I dropped it. You won't be getting this house. Or the shop. Or a single dime from me. Rachel blinked. What are you talking about? Lucas's jaw tightened. Dad, don't be dramatic. I leaned in, my voice steady as steel. Dramatic would have been dragging you into court the moment I heard your whispers. But I didn't. I let you dig your own grave. Every word you spoke about guardianship, probate, liquidation, it's recorded. Every laugh you had at my expense, every plan to erase me, I've got it all. Rachel went pale. Lucas tried to speak, but I cut him off. And while you were planning, I was planning too. Everything, this house, the savings, the shop, has already been placed in a trust. Not for you. Not for your greed. For Sophie. She's the only one left who remembers what family means. Rachel's voice cracked. You can't do that. Oh, but I can, I said, straightening to my full height. And I already have. The storm broke right there in my dining room. Rachel's chair scraped back violently as she stood, shouting about betrayal. Lucas slammed his fist on the table, the papers scattering like snow. They screamed that I was senile, that I was cruel, that I was destroying the family. But I just stood in the center of it, calm as I had ever been, letting their rage wash over me like meaningless noise. Because in my heart, I knew the truth, the family had already destroyed itself the moment they chose greed over love. And when they finally stormed out, slamming the doors so hard the windows rattled, I felt something I hadn't in years. Peace. But they didn't stay quiet for long. 2 weeks after the storm in my dining room, I received the notice, a petition for guardianship, filed by my own children. Lucas and Rachel, claiming I was mentally unfit, that I could no longer manage my affairs. They were bold enough to drag me into court, hoping to take the victory they had failed to snatch in my home. I walked into the courtroom with my head high, cane steady in my grip. The benches were filled, neighbors, extended family, even a few curious townsfolk who had caught wind of the spectacle. Lucas sat at one table, his expensive lawyer whispering in his ear. Rachel perched beside him, lips tight, eyes darting to me with a mixture of pity and smugness. Their attorney rose first, his voice smooth. "Your Honor, my clients only want what's best for their father. He is a widower, 74, struggling with memory lapses. This home, these assets, they are too much for one man to handle. It's in his best interest that guardianship be transferred to his loving children." I almost laughed at the words loving children. When it was my turn, I stood slowly. My lawyer, Holbrook, placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder, but I waved him off. This part, I wanted to handle myself. "Your Honor," I began, my voice steady, echoing in the quiet chamber. "My children have painted me as a burden. An old man lost to time. But if you'll allow, I'd like to let their own words speak for them." I pulled out the recorder, set it gently on the table, and pressed play. The crackle of the monitor filled the room. Lucas's voice rang out, clear as glass, "All we need is the doctor's note. Once the court sees he's losing it, guardianship is automatic. He won't even understand what's happening until it's over." Gasps rippled through the room. Rachel shifted in her seat, her face draining of color. Then her voice followed, "We'll liquidate, split the money, move on. Sophie doesn't need to know. She'll thank us when her college bills are covered." The courtroom grew silent except for the faint hiss of the recording. Even the judge leaned forward, eyes narrowing. When the tape ended, I looked directly at my children. This is what they call love. This is what they call protection. Planning to erase me before I'm even gone. Planning to strip my home, my shop, my memories, for profit. The judge's gavel came down once. Twice. His voice cut through the tension. "I've heard enough. Petition denied." He turned to Lucas and Rachel. "And I suggest you both reconsider your definition of family." Rachel's lawyer buried his face in his hands. Lucas muttered under his breath, his composure crumbling. They tried to protest, but their voices sounded small now, hollow, pathetic. I stood taller than I had in years. "One more thing, Your Honor," I added. "Everything I own has already been placed in a trust. For my granddaughter, Sophie. She's the only one in this family who still knows what love means." Rachel whipped her head toward me, eyes wide with betrayal. Lucas's fists clenched white. But there was nothing left for them to grab, nothing left to steal. The gavel struck again, final and sharp. Case closed. As the courtroom emptied, Sophie rushed up to me from the gallery, her small hand slipping into mine. "Grandpa, did we win?" she whispered. I smiled, squeezing her fingers gently. "We did more than win, sweetheart. We kept what matters." And as I walked out of that courthouse, past my children's stunned silence, I felt Diane beside me. Not a ghost, not a memory, just her presence, steady and proud. The house was quiet when Sophie and I returned from court, but it was no longer the kind of quiet that stings. It was the quiet of safety. The quiet of something preserved. She ran ahead of me into the kitchen, her backpack bouncing. "Grandpa, can I draw at the table?" she asked, already spreading her crayons across the wood. "Of course," I said, settling into Diane's chair. The same chair where I'd once listened to whispers of betrayal through a baby monitor, now filled with the sound of a child humming to herself. She drew us again, just like last time, but this time there was a third figure. A woman with a blue scarf, standing under the lilac tree beside us. "That's Grandma," she explained. "She's smiling, 'cause we won." I had to turn away for a moment, blinking hard, the weight of it pressing in my chest. Later that evening, I walked the yard alone. The lilac bushes swayed in the breeze, their scent carrying memories of Diane. I touched the bark of the tree where Lucas once tried to carve his initials, the porch where Rachel had once braided her doll's hair. All those moments they had buried, I had dug them back out, not for my sake, but for Sophie's. She was the future worth saving. She was the proof that not everything Diane and I built had turned to ash. When the sun dipped low, I returned inside. Sophie had fallen asleep at the table, crayons scattered around her masterpiece. I lifted her gently, carried her upstairs to the guest room, and tucked her beneath the quilt Diane had sewn years ago. Standing in the doorway, I whispered, "This is yours now, Sophie. All of it. The house, the shop, the memories. They'll never take it from you." Downstairs, the grandfather clock chimed the hour. I sat in my workshop, winding the old pocket watch whose hands had once stopped at 7:42. This time, when I closed the case, it ticked steady and strong. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was fighting against time. I felt like I was keeping it. And in that moment, I knew Diane would have been proud.
Hello everyone, and thank you for watching. I truly hope you enjoyed listening to this story as much as I enjoyed creating it. If you did, please consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel to help support the creation of more stories like this. Have a great day or evening.